Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Aftershow. I'm your host, Nikki Novak, and today we are going to be deep diving into Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. We're going to be talking about all the details of the film, the questions the film left behind, the future of Marvel, all that good stuff. But I have to warn you before we go on any further, this is going to be a spoiler-filled episode, so if you have not seen the film, go back, go watch the film, and then come back and join our chat unless you like it that way and you like things spoiled for yourself. But I am spoiled because I have one of my favorite people here to talk. I don't know if we've done one of these in person, but Perri Nemiroff, the amazing Perri Nemiroff, is here
This is
today.
the first one I've ever done in person in the studio. I've done a bunch virtually. Yeah, but this is the first time. Like, I've been in the studio before, but this is the first time I'm doing an after show sitting here at the table.
I know,
it's
it's
really
so
nice.
different in person, and it's so good. And
I'm very excited that it's happening for this particular movie.
One. And I know I saw you at the premiere.
Yes.
And I saw you after, and I was just like, oh, that was the greatest thing I've ever seen. Like, I just had such a good experience watching it. So overall, like, what was your take?
I'm obsessed with this movie. I'm obsessed with this series within Marvel. So when I walked out of the first Guardians of the Galaxy in the summer of 2014, like, I knew it was going to be irreverent and different, especially because it was one of the first cosmic experiences we had in the MCU, but I didn't expect to fall in love with it as much as I did, but I was sure it became my favorite Marvel movie. Turns out, still is my favorite MCU movie of all time. This movie, though, solidified the fact that, without a doubt, Guardians of the Galaxy is my favorite series within the MCU.
Interesting.
So smart, so well done, a series that does it all. Very effective comedy, stellar-looking action where every single set piece in these movies has a distinct quality to it. Yep. And then on top of that, overwhelming emotion.
Yes.
Overwhelming.
Especially this one. Overall, I absolutely loved it too. Like, I was just guffawing all over the place when I left that. No, I did see it again last night. I did have a different experience last night. Well, we talked before we started rolling. I had some strange things happen in my theater, but maybe we'll get into later. I think it's too much for the top of this episode.
One of them feels very, like, on brand for this movie and the subject matter.
Yes.
But also wrong.
I'm just going to save it for later.
Okay.
Let's tease it, and I'm going to save it for later. So we both obviously really loved it. Critics, they liked it. 81%. It's a fresh score. I looked at the previous Guardians Rotten Tomato scores, and the second one got an 85, and the first one got a 92. But this is the highest audience score that they've ever had for a film thus far, 95% audience score. So audiences are really loving this film. The critics' consensus is a galactic group hug that might squeeze a little too tight on the heartstrings. Disagree. The final Guardians of the Galaxy is a loving last hurrah for the MCU's most ragtag family. Let's talk about the great stuff that we loved about this movie. I have to start with, I'm tearing up talking about this, Perri. I don't know why I just got emotional, but this has a sequence that is one of my favorite sequences in the entire MCU. Okay. Can you guess? Maybe?
I could think of quite a few, because you just said tearing up. I could think of quite a few moments in this movie where I was tearing up.
Okay. But it wasn't an emotional moment. It was just, like, affected me. Like, it was just so amazing that it just gets me.
Give me like another clue here.
Well, if I tell you the song, No Sleep
Till
Brooklyn.
I understand that. I feel like that particular moment might so whenever I watch one of the newer Star Wars movies and the March of the Resistance plays, I always cry. And it's a big, heavy action scene. Like in Force Awakens, it's when the X-Wings swoop in and help and save the day. That has a similar quality where the team comes together and they're here to save the day, and that can have real emotional results.
Well, I think it's for a couple of reasons. Number one, it was shot to look like a oneer, right?
So good.
The camera placement was brilliant. So it gets me emotional. I got chills up and down my body because I just reminds me of growing up, going to movies. If somebody had showed you a scene like that couldn't have been achieved years ago. Like, we didn't have the technology. We didn't have that kind of aesthetic. Like, it's just mind-blowing. Like, I've seen it twice now, and I still don't know how they did it.
It's absolutely stunning. The other thing I love about that particular sequence and where it hits in the movie is it's literally one big handoff from one Guardian to the next, showing how they shine in fight scenes as individuals, but also emphasizing the fact that they kind of have to still be passing the baton to one another in order to, win in the overall mission. To me, like that one fight sequence kind of encapsulates what they've earned throughout the entire trilogy.
Yeah. And I think it was so just unexpected when it came in the film. It wasn't at the very end. It was sort of 2/3 of the way through. But that's the second reason I got emotional, was that teamwork and that kind of like, it's in the whole theme of this movie is it's the family that you create, not necessarily the family that you're born with. And that sort of that unison. So that was my favorite.
There's so many like wicked shots in that. Like as we were talking about it, all I could picture was Nebula falling apart, but then coming back together.
And then the rocket in the air. Yeah. And then the camera goes like through and then twists and then he's in the air and he's just like, it's just so good. So what was if you had to choose a favorite moment in the film?
A single favorite moment.
Or scene.
A single favorite moment. It more ties back to my favorite character of the entire trilogy. It's Nebula.
Is it really?
Isn't it incredible where she started in Volume 1? Where, like, I know they were teeing up the family stuff with her then, but really, she's a pretty straightforward villain in that movie with a one-track mind to get back at her sister and to do, like, her evil things. And then she completely morphs into a caretaker and a leader and someone who is trying to build the community that she didn't have. So I think I wrote down, I want to like find the exact line to not mess it up. It was such a beautiful line. I have so many lines written down here. She says, "I'm going to lead the city, make it the type of home I never had." I think that was my single favorite line, single favorite moment. It's just the ultimate payoff for a character like her who's gone on one of the most extreme journeys of not even all the Guardians, but I think of all MCU characters, period, and has basically hit the point where she's grown enough to, I don't know, earn the right to be able to say something like that and also make me believe that she could see it through.
Did you see the things she said about how she got the voice? You probably already know this, that it was Marilyn Monroe and Clint Eastwood. Had she said that before? Did she only release that?
She happened to have said it in my interview, and I'm like, that sounds familiar.
Was that yours?
Oh, it might have been mine, yeah. She definitely said it in my interview.
Yes. And you know what? I never put that together before that moment. But she said how she was on set, like she hadn't really done a huge movie before. And she said that she just wasn't sort of getting the character. Mm-hmm. And then James just came up and gave her a note. That was yours because you said, "What's the best note you ever got?"
Yeah.
That was an amazing revelation. Like, I would never have thought that that's where she got the voice from, but that's exactly the voice. And then she said she found the character that way. So bravo.
She nails that character. I feel like what happens a lot of times with characters where they're covered in like exceptional like makeup and effects and prosthetic elements is like sometimes the actor doesn't get enough credit for how much is still on their shoulders. Yeah. Like everything about the way Nebula carries herself and the way that Karen Gillan is able to, deliver those lines because the other thing about that arc that I think works really well is that it's not like she's turned into a completely different person. There's so much of like that rage and ferocity that she had in the first film that she still has in Volume 3, but she's using it in a different way.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of my favorite character. I don't know if
it's hard.
It really is hard, and it's so easy this time around because of recency bias to say Rocket.
Yeah.
But I have to be honest, Rocket was never like, if you had asked me in the first one who my favorite was, I didn't connect with Rocket so much.
I could see that. They earned that connection over the course of the film.
Yeah. And then when you learn this was his story. Yeah. And then, it was Rocket's story all along where we thought it was Star-Lord's story all along. But really, in a sense, James is saying now that it was kind of Rocket's story all along. What were you going to say?
That's another thing that the second you said, you brought up Star-Lord and Peter Quill, the other thing that I thought was, downright brilliant in this movie is how they handle the situation between Peter Quill and Gamora. That is a complicated relationship to deal with. You have one party where we've been with him in the relationship he established, and like as a viewer who's been with this series since the day it started, like I understand his want and I understand that pull and that desperation to make this Gamora the Gamora he once knew. But then also, here is a new character who isn't that person. He can't force her into that box. And the fact that this movie respected that and managed to push them both forward in the process is something I didn't expect a Marvel movie to ever be able to do.
Well, this movie, what I loved about that relationship, and you're so right about that.
Oh, there's another.
There were so many ways that they could have ended Peter Quill's story in this film. And the fact that he didn't, quote unquote, get the girl or not get the girl. There was kind of a hint of, I bet we were really fun, that line, I bet we were really fun. But when I watched it the second time, when she says to him, when he says, like, don't you think if you opened yourself up, we could maybe have been together? And she says, I don't think so. And the way she says, I don't think so, I wonder how many times they did that take, because it was the perfect blend of, like, not making him feel bad, but being very direct. What do you? Did you?
I found it. I found it. I have like an absurd amount of quotes.
I do the same thing.
I should have separated them or like labeled them so I could find them easily. But this is one of the most powerful lines in the entire movie. Gamora shouts at Peter, "What are you so afraid of in yourself that I need to be something for you?" Like, how relatable is that? Like, we're watching a cosmic Marvel movie with all of these wild out of this world elements, and like that's something that I feel like almost every person on the planet can relate to in one way or another.
People can probably also relate to the fact that I think, especially for people who are married a long time and they say they aren't with the person they married, that they change. That's kind of Gamora in a sense. Like, I don't know who you are anymore. I wonder how many people are going to relate to that aspect of it.
That's what James Gunn is so good at.
Yeah.
Like, really, everything he's done, especially in recent years, he's able to maintain that fun that you would want in a superhero project, but never at the expense of having real emotional truth in his material. And that's what makes the Guardians movies, I think it's the same thing is true of Peacemaker. It makes them experiences that aren't fleeting thrills that are just fun to watch in the moment, but they're things that you think about, and there's also lasting character investment in them because of it.
There for sure is. And he obviously wanted to tell Rocket's story. He said it was his favorite character for a long time. I have to give a shout out to Sean Gunn, who does the physical,
oh my God,
the
he's
motion
great.
capture, because there were so many shots of, Rocket's story, which we should talk about a little bit. His story was so beautifully told, but those shots of him on the operating table where you see his little body stretched out, and then the first moment where you see him and he's terrified in the cage, and then when it comes full circle, when he visits and he sees the other little raccoons in the cage. I mean, just all of the physicality of the body, and also Bradley Cooper, who voices the character brilliantly.
I mean, that's an A+ voice performance. That's like one of those types of voice performances that makes me think, the Oscar probably needs a voice acting category, because there's a lot of people that went into making Rocket and bringing him to screen the way we see him in the final product, but Bradley Cooper gives an exceptional voice performance.
He does. So what other moments were your things that you loved? I thought the music, we always know that his music, but Creep, No Sleep Till Brooklyn, which we talked about. Do you realize from the Flaming Lips, that's another one I loved. But then at the very end, and James does love a dance sequence, Dog Days Are Over. The very end.
I like that.
I love that song. Like, I love that he has it. But the songs are so connected to the characters and the story. It's not just like, oh, there's a cool song in a movie.
Well, sometimes it's not just a cool song in a movie, but I wrote down This Is the Day because I'm also obsessed with Empire Records, and growing up, that's what kind of started to mold my interest in music. So the second that popped up in this movie, I was brought back to another movie that used that song really well that I love dearly. And I don't know, I kind of like that connectivity there.
Yeah, and every time he surprises you, like when you think he kind of peaked with the first couple. With
the evolution of it is nice too, like popular music through the years. I love the evolution from the cassette tape to now the Zune, and it's something that has the possibility to evolve in the future, depending on, I mean, not with James Gunn, obviously, but depending on what they do with these characters. And it's also an important story element also. It is Peter Quill's influence on all of the Guardians, and that also has a ripple effect because now with Nowhere, you see their influence impacting a whole nother group of people. So I feel like even though this is the concluding chapter of this trilogy and this may be the end of this particular iteration of the Guardians, I think the movie does an exceptional job capping off those stories, but also leaving you with the feeling that their influence and the good that they've done for each other is going to continue to radiate through the other characters.
I think what I really loved about this too is how Star-Lord's journey, how it was written. And I think it was redemption for Peter Quill because after Endgame, or after Infinity War.
The punch in the face,
Yeah, the punch in the face. And James Gunn has said, like, he wouldn't necessarily have done that to him. But Star-Lord can kind of be a bit,
impulsive.
A bit impulsive and a bit, immature at times. And I really loved Chris Pratt's performance in this. Shouldn't be under, he makes it look easy. And he reminded me why he's a movie star in this. Like, he just did such an exceptional job of... everything was pitch perfect. I thought every scene that he played was pitch perfect. But my favorite thing was the end.
Okay.
The fact that they disbanded and he went back to Earth and saw his grandfather. That moment for me was like, it could have been so easy to end things with them in Nowhere, having a dance sequence, and they stay together. But the fact that James made the choice to have each person say, you know what, I have a different path right now, was brilliant. You don't often see that. And because maybe on paper, it wouldn't really look like a strong choice, like, oh, someone has to die, or someone has to get married, or someone has to this or that. The fact that he didn't do that and play into conventions.
Well, it's a cool thing that this trilogy does in general because we've talked about it a lot here. It heavily emphasizes the importance of a family and finding that type of connection and how that could change you for the better. But you also can't undervalue the importance of like finding yourself on your own and being happy with yourself on your own. And sometimes being tied to others can stifle certain qualities in yourself. Like for Mantis, Mantis, I thought, had a great arc. And my God, like Palm's delivery from start to finish, it's always been really great. It was just next level material here.
She and Drax.
Oh, I love the two of them together.
Maybe he's my favorite. I don't know.
I would say Drax. I used to say Drax is my favorite character after Guardians 1, and I still do love him. I mean, that goes back to the idea of literally every single one of them having arcs. I forget what the line was in the critics' consensus. Oh no, I'm thinking about something different. Where, I feel like there were some folks complaining about the runtime and if they're like, could you have shaved anything down? And like my big thing about that is no, because we do have a large ensemble, but every single one of them experienced a meaningful arc and transformation in this movie. Drax included. The line, I think Nebula delivers it to him at the end where, she says something to the effect of like, I see who you really are now and it's not a destroyer. You are meant to be a dad.
I liked when she said, when she says that she thinks he's stupid and he says, you think I'm stupid? And then
it makes him forget.
The switch as an actor, when he made that switch, he makes him forget. And then he just goes and the camera doesn't break. So, he did that all in one take. Making that switch, he's so good. He's so
perfect in that role.
I know he wants to do serious movies, but
he's very good in everything.
He's a very good actor.
I mean, one of the last things I had seen him in that was more serious was Knock at the Cabin, and I thought he was great in that.
Yeah, I actually thought the film was a little bit too long. I thought it was a little. People talk about it being bloated,
so then my question though would be, what would you have cut out?
Okay, I think the thing with the children in the cages, because number one, they did it in the last Thor, where you see these children in the cages, and I don't think you had the animals in the cages and the children. I don't think you needed both. I think that's where it became, a little bit bloated, and it wasn't really necessary. And people keep talking about the animal cruelty, but I'm like, what about the children? Like that to me was more disturbing, and it was very disturbing in the last Thor, and I'm very surprised, not that I would ever not Kevin Feige, but that he wouldn't say, we did this already.
Okay.
Why are we doing this again? And I feel like it just wasn't needed in the storyline. That's when it became a little bit too. I know you're going to counter
Yeah,
it. So.
I will. So I'll first point out the Drax element. I do think that was Drax's moment to shine. And if you didn't have the children and his connection to them and him stepping up as a father-like figure, it would have given him no arc, really.
Yeah.
Unless they had leaned more heavily into, you know, how he feels about Mantis leaving. But really, I think all those things go hand in hand. I think it was also important because of the High Evolutionary's plan and operation. The fact that the High Evolutionary is an individual who is so desperate to achieve perfection with his experiments that he's willing to just incinerate batches, not care about the beings that they have become, but literally snap his fingers and make them go away. And then at the end of the movie, you have the Guardians as a family welcoming a higher batch number with also where his experiments started with animals and say, like, all are welcome. Come on. That's what Nowhere is about. It's about accepting every being for who they are. And the fact that you have such a different array of beings being represented in that group right now, I think is important.
I mean, maybe it was presented, though, too separately. Like, it was like the animals were here, and then there was another layer and another beat where here's now children.
It's definitely separate.
And then it sets up, what's the character's name that it sets up? That she was, is it Phyla?
Yeah,
Phyla.
Phyla.
Is it Phyla? She was in the post-credit scene where it sets up her story. I almost feel like you could have maybe had somehow Drax meets her along the way, and it almost becomes that.
But you can't detach her from the other children and her
or
her origin.
I don't know, like on the
the
top of my head, how you would have infused her into the story. But maybe, you know, when they go into the other Earth, maybe he met the Counter Earth. Maybe he meets her there or something. It just felt like it kind of where things start to feel like there's too much going on. And I did think it was a little bit long. The one other thing I will say that didn't 100% work for me, as much as I love the Gamora Peter Quill storyline, I feel like, and this happened to her in Avatar: The Way of Water too, I didn't think she had her own story.
Oh, I do.
Makes sense? It felt like it was through the relationship that you're seeing their story.
That's fair. I do think the relationship winds up being the catalyst for what she experiences. But I think, like, the satisfaction I felt seeing her go back to the Ravagers at the end.
That was great.
Like,
yes.
I do think that with Peter being so pushy, it helped her more wholeheartedly embrace the path that she knew was right for her, while also being accepting of this unique family that she just met. It kind of like broadened her horizons a little bit.
Maybe I was just missing like one moment or one scene where it wasn't just about him convincing her, him talking about the relationship. Okay. Because that end point that you're talking about where she goes back to the Ravagers worked 100%. I'm like, that's the moment that I was missing that would have tied the whole thing together, either in the beginning or middle of the story, or I didn't see her as an individual going through something. I just saw it sort of tied in a bow at the end, and her reaction and her joy was great, but I didn't feel like I felt her journey throughout the film.
It definitely leans heavy on the Peter thing. The one other side of it that I really appreciated, that I thought served the character well, was her interactions with Nebula, and the fact that you've got Peter, her boyfriend, desperately clinging and like basically begging her to be the Gamora that he once knew and loved, whereas Nebula's kind of understanding about, or maybe not understanding. Like I wouldn't mind more material just in terms of giving her the opportunity to really voice how she feels about maybe losing the sister that she reconnected with before and how she feels about this Gamora. But they have different feelings about where Gamora stands, and watching those run parallel to one another, I thought served Gamora very well.
That makes sense, yes.
I'll tell you one Gamora thing that I didn't like, though.
Oh.
And I mentioned it before we started rolling. So the only non-believable moment in this entire movie to me, the one thing that I flagged that I said, that wouldn't happen, she's too smart, is when Gamora tries to get back to the Ravagers and Aisha picks up, I'm like they're talking on a phone, Aisha picks up and Gamora willingly gives the coordinates, having no clue that you're talking to the Sovereign. Gamora is smarter than that. That is one thing I didn't believe.
That's so funny because I noticed that too, but I had forgotten about it until you brought it up. I feel like we could go on and on and on about the things that we loved. Anything else that you wanted to add before we move on to sort of like the future of the MCU and where things are going?
I'll just say, because we haven't brought up Adam Warlock, Will Poulter is perfect casting in that role. I am not a comics reader, and I feel it's often important to point that out, but in particular in this case, because even though I'm not a comics reader, in order to, prepare and be somewhat in the know for these movies, I'll usually Google a good deal about particular characters that are entering the MCU for the first time, and I did that, of course, with Adam Warlock. Even after doing that, though, the Adam Warlock in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 didn't really line up to the version of the character that I had read about. So that was a little surprising to me, but I think it worked really well. A big theme of these movies is family, and the idea of Adam Warlock essentially being a baby with a moldable mind who is around all of these people who could completely reshape the trajectory he is on in this life is the ideal addition to this particular story. So I loved that. I thought the comedy worked really well, and I thought they earned that final moment for him at the end. And I also just love him in Blur.
I love him too, and I think he's a captivating actor. I thought people did criticize sort of the disconnect between the character they knew and what they saw on screen. I don't know enough about the comics to know the difference, but I thought, he was teased in the end credits as being, one of the new Guardians. And I think he would be somebody I'd be really excited to see more from. But I also want to shout out the High Evolutionary Chukwudi Iwuji.
He's so good.
Was so good. And I said this when I reviewed this film, that there are so many villains that, can make or break one of these films. And wow, did I connect.
Scary.
He was scary. And some people had a hard time with the fact that he yelled a lot. And I was like, you know what? We've seen a lot of these villains, quote unquote villains, that sort of play it the Hannibal Lecter route where they go very understated with the evil and it's all internal. I loved seeing the rage. I thought he was so connected to the material. If he wasn't connected to it and such a great actor, I think it wouldn't have worked.
Well, that rage and loss of control is sparked by one of his creations outsmarting him. So I thought that the smarter and more effective in this mission Rocket became, and how that kind of comes out in him losing his cool, I thought that was very, very appropriate.
Did you cry when you You did. Yeah.
I cried quite a few moments. Obviously, Lila, Teefs, and Floor just totally ruined. Like, I had a hard time with that. The reunion with the grandfather, I cried.
Yeah.
When Rocket came back to life, I thought that was also a really great, I'm not going to call it a dream sequence, because I think it's kind of like an interaction that living Rocket will always feel within him. But when he has that conversation with Lila and she's like, nope, you go back now. Sitting in a puddle of tears.
Yeah. When she goes like this, it's not your time yet. Those characters were unbelievable.
I thought they were great.
Brilliantly done. Oh my gosh, I feel like we could keep gushing about this. I feel like we could keep gushing for hours about the film, but we have to move forward. The two post-credit scenes.
Okay.
I told you how much I love the ending. I love Star-Lord going back to Earth. I loved the moment with the grandfather. The fact that they said Star-Lord will be back. And here's one thing I'll just point out before I ask you a question. I was convinced when I saw this movie, I thought Star-Lord was dead because they had the European premiere before we saw the premiere.
Yeah.
And everybody kept talking about how emotional this film was. And I'm like, okay, somebody dies. And when he gets pushed out like gravity style into space and his face blows.
Oh, I thought that was it.
I thought that was it. I'm like, oh, here it is. They're killing him, and James Gunn wants to bring him to DC, and he's going to make sure he kills Star-Lord. Like, you're not coming back. I was like, I don't think he would do that on purpose. But no, I thought that was the moment. By the way, I met the makeup artist, his personal makeup artist, at the premiere, and told me that face bloat was practical, that James wanted everything practical.
That was something that I appreciated about the movie in general, whether it was, individuals on Counter-Earth, some of the Ravagers. So, there were a lot of effects involved, but so many of them were practically done. And I'm like a reach out and touch it kind of person. That's how I like that stuff. There are incredible visual effects artists. I would never knock down the quality of their work, but I do really love practical creatures.
Yeah, and he uses both effectively, and I know he wanted to shoot a lot of it both ways. But so, what did you think about the fact that they're teasing?
Yeah.
Do you think is he going to take on the Tony Stark mantle? Like, is he going to? It's hard to say, right?
That is not what I would have thought going into the film. But when I think about the journey that Peter has been on and what that journey looks like, at least in my theory brain going forward, I wouldn't be surprised if that's some sort of path that he's on. Because, even though he handed the reins over to Rocket at the end of the film, he has been a somewhat effective leader who brought these individuals together to form an unexpected family that they never in their wildest dreams thought they could benefit from. And he was kind of the conductor of all of that. But I think he has also been a character who's been quite selfish along the way, too. And I think that selfishness does come out in Infinity War when he ruins the plan by punching Thanos because, he has a knee-jerk reaction and his heart is broken and he loses his cool. I feel like his time on Earth with his grandfather and finding himself is what's going to make him the best leader he could possibly be. And that could mean graduating from, not that the Guardians is a lesser group, but a smaller group like the Guardians to maybe being, a real leadership force within the Avengers going forward. So I can see that happening.
And what did you think about how all the rest of the characters sort of finished their story?
I'm very happy with that. I am so excited to see. I was very, very worried that the end of the movie would have more finality about the Guardians overall.
Yes.
I know there were quotes out there that said this iteration of the Guardians was coming to a close, but there were also so many people out there who phrased it like the Guardians is over.
Yes.
And I loved the Guardians, and I didn't want them to be over, but I love the idea of a new iteration of the group forming and of the, let's call them legacy characters, taking the things they've learned and passing them down to newer Guardians who then could pass it down to another generation. And that's also the point we're at with the MCU now. I mean, look at the future. Look at the Marvels. You have 3 characters that have entered the MCU at different points in their life, one of which is one of the younger crew who could probably take this franchise 10 years into the future.
Yeah.
That's what's happening right now.
Yeah. Are you hopeful for that film?
For the Marvels?
Yeah.
Oh, my God, yeah. I love the 3 of them. I love those 3 characters, and I thought that teaser was really effective in terms of selling that scenario, really emphasizing the value of the comedy in it, but also suggesting that, it is an opportunity for 3 unique individuals to learn from one another. And I don't know if my feelings about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 says anything. I like storylines like that.
Yeah, and I think it feels like the timing feels right for that film. I feel like I've missed Brie Larson's character.
Yeah.
I feel like I haven't seen her in so long that I want to see more of that story and that's just that team building again.
Tiana Paris, too. She deserves some time in the spotlight.
Yeah, and from the teaser, it almost looks like she's the lead, if there is one. It almost looks like it's flipped a little bit.
Yeah, and there's also kittens.
That makes you very happy, I'm sure.
It does make me very happy.
Let's talk about the second post-credit scene that sort of teases this new, with Rocket as the leader. We have Groot that, is a little bit bigger. Adam Warlock. Kraglin?
Yeah.
I always get it wrong. Sean Gunn.
From first mate to being on the poster of Guardians of the Galaxy 3 to being a full-fledged member.
And being the brother. Cosmo the speed dog.
Space dog.
Let me take that back.
I mean,
Cosmo
he's probably
the space
fast,
dog, played by Maria Bakalova. I just know the dog as Cosmo and Bad Dog.
No, she's a good dog.
She's a good dog. She's a bad dog. She's a good dog. I didn't even realize that was her.
Yeah.
By the way, I had seen her at the premiere, and then it was lost on me because so many people are in prosthetics and that. If she was a different
I love her
character.
work in general. So whenever she gets cast in something, I kind of file it away.
Yeah.
I don't know.
But I thought that was a fun ending. I thought, you know what? It actually made me excited for what's to come. It didn't necessarily say for sure that that's where they're going to go with it. As we know with a lot of these end credit scenes that
Well.
they tease things and then we're waiting a long time. And we don't
Yeah.
necessarily know that that's going to happen. But I thought it was clever.
I thought it was really effective, and that's what I want. I want the Guardians to continue. I want these, I want these types of characters, these spaces that James Gunn has been able to play in, which are, I don't know, just like really vibrant and exciting to me, and they're unique from all the other elements that we have in the MCU right now. I want them to continue. This is probably very close-minded of me to say, but I've become so used to James Gunn's Guardians that, and it is a very specific kind of storytelling. He is a very unique filmmaker in general. I'm not saying that there is no filmmaker on the planet able to do what he has done, and he is the one and only, and that's the end. I think there are probably very capable people out there, but when it comes to something being in such unique hands for so long, there's a little nervousness that comes with the thought of, if we do continue with Guardians, the baton needing to be passed from a unique auteur like James Gunn to someone else. And, for all I know, they'll announce something and that someone else will really excite me. I'll completely change my tune on the matter. But at this point in time, I'm excited, but a little nervous.
It almost mirrors like James going over to DC and creating something new and having the reins been given to, passed over to somebody else and seeing what they're creating. So hopefully, I was thinking about it this morning and I was thinking, oh yeah, but he's not going to be doing it. That's right. Because it would be really cool to see what he did with those characters and how he would build them.
I've been trying to think of another filmmaker that he could maybe bring in or recommend for the job.
But I think that's the key. I think the key is to bring somebody who's passionate about the material and not just somebody who's a great filmmaker who, let's give them this.
Yeah.
It would have to be somebody that he almost, hands the keys to the kingdom to and says, this is the person, which I don't know who that would be.
I mean, maybe it's because Everything Everywhere All at Once is fresh on my mind, but the Daniels feel like the type of filmmakers who could do anything.
Oh my gosh. Could you imagine?
Anything. I mean, I kind of could imagine.
I could too.
I feel like you don't make a movie like Everything Everywhere All at Once and then have the answer to the question, can you imagine, ever be no? Like, no matter what it is.
It would be so incredibly creative and unique. And I asked them in an interview if they ever did a Marvel movie, what they would do, like what storyline they'd like to focus on. And they said they want to do Kevin Feige's story and that he's trying to get his daughter, help her with her homework and that kind of thing. They're like, we want to tell Kevin Feige's origin story. I mean, we don't want to tell a superhero movie story. They're like, we're done with it.
That's not a bad idea.
I know.
There's some sort of, now I'm going too far down this rabbit hole, but there's some sort of really cool idea with having it be a very grounded filmmaker origin story that takes place in this reality as we know it, and then having an Everything Everywhere element where the MCU bleeds into his reality.
Yes.
I want that too now. I want that too now.
We have it on film because that's actually a really good idea. Perri, you're the best.
You're the best.
Thank you for joining. Thanks for having this conversation with me about this movie that we love so much.
More in the future, please.
Tell everybody where they can find you.
Oh, wow. Everywhere. You can find me hosting Collider Ladies Night, which is my baby. I adore it. It's on the Collider Extras YouTube channel, Twitter, Instagram, Perri Nemiroff, on TikTok. I'm obsessed with TikTok. Perri Nemiroff over there.
Well, thank you again. And thank you for watching. We hope you guys enjoyed this spoiler-filled discussion of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. See, I'm tearing up again. And I'm going to end on what happened to me in the movie theater last night. And that is very in keeping with this movie. A mouse ran over my lap in the middle of the movie. Yeah, a mouse ran over my lap. And that's where we're going to end it. Thanks for joining, everybody. We'll see you next time on the After Show. Bye.